Have you ever been in a situation that seems perfect, and then weeks, months, or years later, you discover it's not as perfect as it seems? You find yourself vacillating between putting on rose-colored glasses and facing up to the facts and walking away. I call this state of ambivalence sitting on a fence, and let me tell you, if you sit on a fence long enough, it gets uncomfortable. My fence was my career. I want to share with you my personal odyssey of enlightenment as a pharmacist and former pharmaceutical ad writer, from being a wizard of white lies to being an ardent advocate for honesty in pharmaceutical marketing. And if there's one lesson I want to leave you with, it's this: just because something sounds like science doesn't make it so. When I went to Massachusetts College of Pharmacy, I worked part-time for the president. Ray Goslin was a pioneer in pharmaceutical marketing. He suggested that I pursue a career in medical advertising because he thought it would leverage both my creative writing skills and my scientific training. Pharmaceutical ad writers like me and others take the science generated by drug companies and we weave it into powerful stories that make people clamor for the newest and latest drugs, medical devices, and treatments. We do not work at pharmaceutical companies. We work at advertising agencies, medical education companies, and PR firms retained by the pharmaceutical industry to help promote their brands. I learned about the meaning of science to drug companies my first week on the job. I was a writer at an ad agency in New York. We were meeting with a client who had a new drug for hypertension. We spent the next 2 hours debating how to describe the drug's mechanism of action. Should we describe it as being potassium conserving or sodium depleting? Would it seem more impressive if we spelled out the word potassium or used the symbol K+ from the periodic table? I was so bored. However, I internalized the first lesson of medical marketing: wrap everything in science in order to sell drugs. The science drug companies use is not fake, it's real. However, it is misleading because it is incomplete. Drug companies cherry-pick scientific facts, which then are spun in a positive direction as they flow through an information pipeline. The dissemination of this science may seem spontaneous. However, it is anything but. It is planned, organized, and coordinated by an army of science and marketing communicators, all to the tune of $30 billion a year. I believe drug companies have the right to market their products. I believe drug companies have the right to earn profits. However, drug companies in America do much more than market their medicines. They actually shape healthcare. Americans are less than 5% of the world population, yet we consume 1/3 of the world's $1.4 trillion marketplace in prescription medicines. But more disturbing than these costs is the suffering that our culture of overprescribing causes. We put kids as young as 5 on antipsychotic medications. We inflict cholesterol-reducing agents on people who don't need them. And we overprescribe diabetes medications to older Americans who then wind up in the hospital due to drug-induced falls and fractures. At the end of the day, a pharmaceutical company's objective is to maximize their profits. As an executive at a pharmaceutical company told me, drug companies say they want their drugs used appropriately. However, drug companies just want their drugs used. Will they ever admit that publicly? Hell no. Let me show you how easy it is to skew science to sell drugs. There are 3 primary marketing strategies that drug companies use. First, you can exaggerate the drug's benefits. Second, you can expand the number of patients needing treatment. And third, you can minimize the drug's risks. These strategies can be hard to detect because they're based on lies of omission, not outright lies. The marketing of benefits actually begins at the clinical trial phase. The drug company that is designing the study is the same company that at a future date hopes to profit off the sale of that drug. The bar for FDA approvals is actually quite low. The drug company only needs to show that their drug is more effective than placebo. There are times where a company compares their new drug to an existing treatment called the standard of care. These generally use a non-inferiority trial design. A non-inferiority trial design is a tongue twister, even to a seasoned writer like me. What it means is that the new drug only needs to be not worse, not inferior than the standard of care. Let me repeat that. What it means is that the new drug needs to be no worse, not inferior to the standard of care. I had a client who was trying to get approval for a drug for advanced pancreatic cancer. The initial trial results were unpromising. The drug only extended life by 30 days. The client, however, appeared unfazed. He believed that we could get doctors to prescribe the drug despite its lack of efficacy. I remember looking at him thinking how cold and calculated he sounded. I did not, however, say anything because I was there to do a job, not to deliver a lecture on empathy. I created an ad campaign that depicted patients desperately trying to hang on for 30 days more so they could attend their daughter's wedding or their son's law school graduation. The client was overjoyed with the campaign, which featured the headline, "I want to live." Cancer drug marketing is an example of how advertising plays on our hopes and fears and shapes our core attitudes about sickness and health. Imagine if drug companies promoted cancer prevention instead of cancer treatment. Sometimes I ask my colleagues if they thought we were using science to fool doctors. I was met with blank stares and looks of total miscomprehension. I realized that my colleagues felt that I was insulting their integrity. So I remained on my fence, not wanting to make waves. Let me explain another marketing strategy that helps expand the number of treatable patients. I like to call this strategy supersizing. Today, 45% of Americans take drugs for cholesterol. We spend so much money on diabetes care that Congress formed a commission to investigate why. When you have 25 drugs to reduce high blood sugar or 10 drugs to reduce cholesterol, there comes a time where there are not enough treatable patients. Drug companies can only earn a profit if they supersize the patient pool. Imagine a pizza. If 10 companies share a pizza of patients, each company gets a small slice of the pie. However, if you supersize the pizza, each company walks away with a generous slice of the profits. Supersizing is more sophisticated than traditional marketing. Pharmaceutical companies hire doctors, so-called thought leaders, who represent their interests at medical conferences, in scientific publishing, and with the medical associations who determine how drugs are used. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid reported that these doctors were paid $2.3 billion in 2019. As recently as 25 or 30 years ago, cholesterol was not an issue with the medical community. Today, most Americans believe that every adult with high cholesterol should be on a cholesterol-reducing agent. I helped perpetuate this myth. I wrote one of the first thought leader presentations on this topic. I had to convince doctors that high cholesterol was as great a risk factor as high blood pressure or smoking for heart disease, despite the fact that there was little evidence to that effect. Today, the myth persists that high cholesterol is bad for everyone, even though that is not true. I finally did fall off the fence. It was a night to remember. I was working on a new drug for schizophrenia. This drug was more effective and safer than existing treatments. At least that's what we said in our marketing materials. As the drug was used in more and more patients, reports started to emerge that the drug caused 3 serious side effects: morbid obesity, diabetes, and enlarged breasts in men. The client became very concerned that these side effects would interfere with sales. They approached us and asked if we could help them prove that the side effects were unrelated to the drug. Unfortunately, the side effects were actually a byproduct of the drug's mechanism of action. The client was not happy to hear this. They asked us to keep looking. I reached out to medical school faculty who confirmed my findings. The client was still not satisfied. One night, my ad agency manager came to my office in tears, begging me for help. She was afraid that the client was going to pull the account from the agency. And in one moment, I was enlightened. No more rose-colored glasses, no more ambivalence, no more fence. The next day, I resigned. I did get a good laugh several years later because that company was fined $2.2 billion for making false and misleading claims about that drug. We can learn a lot from the pharmaceutical industry. One thing I learned is that no obstacle is insurmountable. Instead of demonizing the industry, we need to start imitating it. We need to form our own army of science and marketing communicators. Our army of communicators will build a pipeline of drug and disease information that is a trusted alternative to the pharmaceutical industry. We will amplify the voices of doctors without ties to industry. This consortium should consist of medical and pharmacy schools, physician experts, and former pharmaceutical ad writers. We will fund this alliance with a small fee on payments made by drug and device companies to doctors. My nonprofit, RxBalance, was part of a National Institute of Health study that showed that doctors and ad writers could collaborate successfully on medical content. We identified gaps in physician and patient knowledge, and then we closed those gaps with ad-style messaging, using workflows and editorial processes from pharmaceutical advertising. This year, I am proud to say that RxBalance worked with government physicians on a campaign to make prescribing safer for older patients with diabetes. Countering the influence of pharmaceutical marketing on American healthcare is a Herculean task. However, every journey starts with the first step. What we cannot do alone, we can do together. I commend you to the words of the first-century Jewish scholar Hillel. If not you, who? If not now, when? It took me 30 years to get off my fence. May you get off yours sooner. Thank you.